to the Unlock a Life You Love podcast. My name's Dr. Tim Teel. I am the doc of Unlock, helping everyone unlock flourishing good health and expansive emotional well being by teaching people the information and the gap in between the physical world that we can weigh and measure and the non physical world of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and spirit. And filling that gap for us today and helping us unlock a life we love is Pam Popper. Pam is with Make Americans Free Again. Pam, tell us about your organization. Tell us who you are and what it is that you're up to here.
Okay, great. Well, I've been in the healthcare business for almost 30 years now. I own a company called Wellness Form Health. And what we've been doing for 30 years is teaching people how to interact safely with the healthcare system because it has been corrupt for so long. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can be harmed. And furthermore, just from a common sense standpoint, the way that people buy houses and cars and other things that are retirement accounts that are important is they investigate and they take their time, they learn a little bit about what they're going to do and make good decisions based on information. My gosh, it's such a wild idea. How about doing that when you make choices about your body, right? So we started as a consumer advocacy company. And then we've opened a school. We train health professionals to practice the informed way. That's what we call it. And we recently just opened our first clinic. So I think the solution to the healthcare problem is you have an informed provider who meets with an informed consumer, and the costs go down and the harm goes down and the health goes up and everybody wins. At least that's been our experience. So we're excited about that. And then that led to the formation in 2020 of Make Americans Free Again, because I had been writing about, making documentaries about, involved in all kinds of activities around the partnership between government and health, which has been used for hundreds of years actually to do terrible things. So when the whole COVID thing happened in 2020, it's not like I know everything. I just knew a lot about this and what it was. And so I looked at the situation, said to myself, there are two things we can do to make this better. And there are about 10 things that people waste their time on that can't possibly help. All right. And I like to win. And I know you can't win all the time, but one of the things you can do to make it easier to win is you pick strategies that you have a good chance of working. So the first thing is there's no question that our personal lives are being intruded upon by medicine and government and all that. And it's getting worse, not better. We just saw it for the first time in its full-blown glory in 2020. So the way that this was dealt with in Eastern Europe during the communist days is they formed a parallel society that made the government irrelevant. And just one example I'll give you is in Czechoslovakia, the government forbade the citizens to see American films translated to English. And the reason they did that is they were afraid that the Czechs would be all excited about freedom. So there was a very robust cinema business. It just happened in people's living rooms and basements. Everybody saw all the movies and they were all translated to English, and the government couldn't do anything about it. This became such a big thing that the communists just up and left. I mean, you can read about this, the Velvet Revolution, and not a single gun fired. They just said, if we don't have any control, it's no fun anymore. So they walked out. So that's when we started our tribes, forming the parallel society by networks of people gathering, and then using the court system, which is our only functioning branch of government, to file lawsuits. The legislative branch, it's the uniparty that works for the drug companies, and the executive branch at all levels, state, federal, they're just too far gone. So we've had a great deal of success with both, and eventually that will help feed a healthcare system, because I'm going to flip the switch in about 5 years and we're going to become the payer as well. We're going to start a medical cost sharing plan. So that's the 5-minute summary.
Just became my new best friend. I love what it is that you're saying, and we're not talking about violent takeover and so forth. We're
Mhm.
talking about simply providing better ideas, better,
Mhm.
safer, faster, cheaper, more effective. I love that, and I love this idea of a parallel society because I agree with you. I think the world's seen plenty of violence here, and not the least of which are two attempts on a presidential candidate's life. For crying out loud,
Yeah.
violence is not the answer, nor has it ever been. But I love the concept of a parallel functioning healthcare system and so forth. How do you see that really working? I mean, no, the Americans have turned over. I mean, no, you're talking about becoming an informed consumer. I mean, forever we have turned over decision making to the physician and said, "Well, you're the doc here." I mean, if I heard that once, I heard it 1,000 times as a functioning physician. How do we get people to take their power back? How do we do that, ma'am?
It's easy. It's very easy. And I'll tell you, I've written a lot of books about it. I get a lot of attention thanks to people like you who interview me and that sort of thing. But we get calls every day from people who want out of the medical mill. They don't know how to do it because they feel helpless because they don't know much about their bodies and they don't know how to look things up. And so what we do is we take that person who's been victimized from lack of knowledge and we turn them into a powerful person. And our market is the person who wants out of the medical mill. So one thing people will say to me is, how are you going to build a parallel healthcare system and something that when people just want to take a pill? That's not our market. Our market is people who don't just want to take a pill. Our market is people who say, I'm seeing too many doctors, I'm worse instead of better. Show me how not to do this. So we get people out of the medical mill and we take them where health matters to Wellness Forum, right? And our people, if they've been members for a while, they're so much more knowledgeable than their doctors. No disrespect here intended, but they will often say to a physician, we actually practice saying this out loud. Thanks so much for the suggestion. I'm going to be looking into this. And if you have anything for me to read, I'll take it with me. But don't worry, I can look it up on my own. And when I come back next time, I will tell you what my decision is about this test, this drug, this whatever. And so our people spend, we know this because we track about 65% less on healthcare than the average person. And so the business of paying for healthcare, if we go back to actually some conscientiousness about payment because the consumer is close to what it costs for things, and so is the provider, and they don't need as much attention, we can ratchet down the cost. The one place where medicine shines is emergency care, and I don't fancy myself ever being in that business. But most of what we do in medicine is not in the emergency room. It's people who drove themselves to the doctor's office and allowed themselves to be harmed by testing and drugs and all that sort of thing. And that's the market that we can target.
So, fascinating. I know that in the last 4 or 5 years of my practice as a physician, I found myself less and less using drugs, less and less using surgery, and more using diet,
Mhm,
more and more using emotional modulation because
mhm,
everyone in medicine understands that that a significant number of the problems that walk into our front door, we know they're emotional issues, we know they're psychiatric issues, but no, but the best tool that we have is yet another pill to throw at it. And it wasn't until I was introduced to emotional freedom technique tapping and emotional recoding and breath work, for crying out, breathing, just
mhm.
breathing,
Who knew,
was
right?
unbelievably powerful. It's not our physician's fault, okay,
Mhm,
for not knowing these things. They are in a cult of thinking that they don't realize that that they're in a cult of thinking because they're not allowed to discuss spiritual things. They're not allowed to go down the pathway of understanding diet and food and its effect on human beings. In fact, we've actively suppressed diet as part of food or as part of medicine because it
mhm,
doesn't fit our cash flow model. Okay, and I learned that myself by getting kicked out of medicine over and over and over again for doing things that worked, but it
mhm.
screwed up somebody else's cash flow model. Okay, so I get what it is that you're saying. I'm 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 kind of confused about how do we get people there? How do we get people to your front door to say, "No, maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a more cost-effective way to march our way through healthcare." So how do we get people to that point?
I think you have to just get out and talk to people. How I started this in Columbus is I just started giving workshops. If there were two people in a room, that was a crowd. I gave a workshop. Now I give workshops in front of 5,000 people or 25,000 people, so I get a bigger audience every time I do it. So I think we just have to tell people about this. And I don't find that the consumers we're talking to are unwilling. The big issue is how long it takes to get people out of the medical mill, because almost everything that they're doing is wrong. And by the way, one thing about doctors, I know some very fine doctors and some that I would trust with my own health. They're few and far between. And part of our problem is that I understand the system is constraining what doctors can do, but we're admitting too many people to medical school. And this is a problem that's gone back a couple hundred years, who have personality problems that make them bad candidates for medical school. And if you take a look at what happened in Germany in the 1930s, the group that signed up the fastest and with the highest percentage to join the Third Reich were medical doctors, seconded by nurses. And so when you have that type of personality, there's something wrong with some of these people. They get into medicine. And the problem is, yes, the institutions are setting the protocols and all that sort of thing, but Hitler set the protocols, but the doctors went along with it. And so if a significant percentage of doctors, if half of the doctors in the country refused to do it, the system would be brought to its knees within a matter of days. And so the failure of medicine to speak up, and I know what happens when you do. I have been at considerable risk, particularly since 2020, for having spoken up about all of this stuff. But your own integrity should overrule your fear. And so I'm hoping the bigger problem is not finding patients. The bigger problem is finding healthcare professionals who are willing to go through our training program to re-engineer themselves, to leave their bad ideas behind and really start from scratch. Because that's what I had to do, by the way. In order to be effective, I had to get rid of a whole lot of preconceived notions I had about a lot of things. And it's difficult to come to grips with the idea that I did a lot of things that didn't work and were harmful, not knowing better, but now I have to give it up, right? So the vitamin D hoax, probably one of the biggest examples of this, is just a ridiculous. It is a hoax. It was a hoax from the beginning. I called it in 2011, I called it the hoax. But that's an example of something people really have trouble giving up. And once you get them to do it, though, then they start saying, well, I wonder what else I'm doing that's right. So the hard part is not the consumer part. The hard part is recruiting enough people to join the healthcare system on the treatment end.
Sign me up, sister. That's you're singing off of my song sheet. Well, my introduction to to all the things that I wasn't taught in medical school got kicked off by a patient who walked into my office one day asking me to look down his throat because he had a cough that wouldn't go away, feeling like he had something stuck in his throat. I put a camera down his throat and I said, "Listen, on your paperwork, you told me you had a history of cancer, but you didn't tell me what kind." He said, "I had esophageal cancer." I said, "When?" He said, "Which time?" I said, "Excuse me, you had it more than once?" He said, "Yeah, they cut it out of me, and in 2 months it came right back." And I said, "It does that, but when was this?" He said, 35 years ago. I said, "Come again, Chief?" He said, "Yeah, you heard me. It was 35 years ago." And I said, I was a journalist in another life, broadcast journalist. And I said, I recognize a story when I hear one, but you had breakfast this morning. I know because you got egg on the corner of your mouth, and I got a camera down your throat looking at the top of your esophagus. So you're still eating with the same esophagus that you were born with. I said, you realize you've been dead for 30 years. He said, yeah, I know. I said, what is going on here? So I said, you did something, didn't you? And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, what did you do? And he told me, and I said, you got to be kidding me. It can't possibly be that simple. He said, it's what I did for 35 years.
Mhm,
And it essentially came down to little more than a matter of self-love, for crying out loud.
mhm,
And when I go out there and talk to people, if you check out my podcast, you'll see these people all the time on my podcast
mhm,
of facing stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 cancers, and they clean up their diet, and they sit down and do a little bit of self-love work, and here they are 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, perfectly healthy. And I'm like,
mhm,
what the? They didn't teach me any of this stuff in medical school. Are you kidding me? They certainly didn't teach me anything about food. The medical school where I went had a greasy spoon restaurant at the front door. I should have turned around and walked out right then. I mean, literally every day at 11:30, it started belching smoke, and you could go get a cheeseburger and French fries right there at the front door of the medical school. something wasn't quite right. I mean, dumb me. Here, I turned my entire career over to a bunch of people who obviously they know better than I do. What what the heck is going on? So I spent 20 years of my life, under the spell of doctor knows best, and then realized at the end of my career, oh, this is all just a bunch of hooey. I mean, for crying out
Mhm.
loud, if we changed our diets, we change the things that are coming out of our hearts and then out of our minds, that's how we unlock a life you love. For crying out loud, that's where real health lives. It doesn't live in a pill bottle. And no, so what you're saying here and what you're doing is just like, oh my goodness, take me home, mama. Take me home. So how do people get involved with you guys? Can they do it online or must they do it in person or no?
No,
Tell me what's going on.
we have members in 33 different countries, so you can live any place on the planet. We work through translators sometimes when people don't speak the language. We do talk to everybody. We actually have people answer the phone 12 hours a day, and we talk to everybody before they join. And we have varying levels of membership depending upon what it is that you need, but it's all education based. I mean, there's a lot of one-on-one and hands-on work with people, but there's information and education that people must commit to because it's if you don't learn this stuff, you'll constantly be victimized by the next thing that happens, right? So the goal is to take a person and say, okay, your immediate problem is whatever it is. You're overweight, you're diabetic, you had a heart attack, you have a brain tumor, whatever it is that's gone wrong. We have to pay attention to that right now because it's right now. But in the process of that, we start a learning process so that the next time something is suggested to you, well, I mean, we don't have anybody taking vitamin D who's with wellness. I mean, they knew it was the people who were members at the time knew it was a hoax, and the people who come in later they find out it's a hoax, right? Our people do not have muscle testing and blood tests done. You know, the endless blood tests where it's 30 some pages and it comes in a UPS box. They don't agree to that stuff, as you know, because you're the right type of doc. The more stuff you look for, the more you find, right? And the older the person is, the more inconsequential all these little incidental things become. So we're trying to get, and our folks are really good about this, we're getting them to the place where they seek care when they're sick instead of hanging out with doctors all the time. You don't hang out with car repairmen and home improvement people all the time. You call them when you need them, right? So changing that relationship. So anyway, people become a member. They join based on the level of service that they want from us, including unlimited one-on-one appointments and that sort of thing. And then we offer a lot of supplemental programs, boot camps that we do via Zoom, and we do health boot camps in the summertime, 3 nights, 3 hours. A lot of stuff we do for free too, so people can try us out before they make a decision to commit. But that's basically how we reach out to people. It doesn't matter where you live on the planet. We record everything that we do so you can watch it later if you can't be live. And the last thing I'll add is we have huge libraries of information that people can access, 3,600 hours worth of video and 1,700 fully referenced articles on everything from kidney stones to cancer.
Fantastic. So what are some of the general guidelines that you guys talk about as far as food goes?
I think that our approach is that it is, in my mind, irrefutable that a plant-based diet is best. It doesn't have to be vegan. And I think some of my colleagues have turned this into an ideological campaign rather than health. And I always say, tongue in cheek, the name of the company isn't I Want to Be Like Pam. I'm a rather well-known vegan, but I'm in the it's a scientific endeavor, and I have my own personal reasons for doing that. But the average person can eat animal food 2 or 3 times a week. A starchy diet because that's where your calorie density comes from. Lots of fruits and vegetables, some processed foods, and we show people a pyramid, by the way, because it's so easy to see. Like the further up the pyramid you go, the less of the stuff you're supposed to eat. So when you get to the tippy top, it's treats for birthdays and celebrations and that sort of thing. So every once in a while, somebody will say, "Well, what about National Kidney Donors Week? Do I get cake then?" And I said, "No, it really is like your birthday and Christmas and Thanksgiving." And so it's a very practical plan. We have a very high sustainability, like our people are able to do this and they're not moving in and out of the diet because it's so strict and that kind of thing. So just mostly plants, and then some processed food, treats on holidays, and a little bit of animal food if you choose to eat it, not required, of course. And the biggest thing that we have to worry about is the most overweight people eat the least amount of food, and teaching them how to eat a calorie dilute diet where you can have as much as you want. And you'd think everybody would be so excited about it, but they've been so terrorized about their fatness and starvation as the key that it's hard to get them to eat. But once they do, they're like, oh my God, this is wonderful, you
Right.
know? So that's basically it. And I think the key is we want people at the end of this process, when they kind of come to the other side, to say, the food is a whole lot better than I thought it was going to be. And this was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. And what I feel very strongly about this. A lot of the stuff that people are being told to do, their friends and family think they're crazy and they don't want to do it. And that's a sure sign that we're just not going to make much progress. So one of the things that people will say to me who hang out with me sometimes, they'll say, you're so normal. Like I don't know what I expected, but you can eat anywhere. I love steakhouses. They have big potatoes and salads, and so you just want to teach people to fit in and be healthy, right? Not join a private club cult kind of thing. So that's what we do with diet.
Awesome. So talk to me about what you teach people about emotional well-being and spiritual stuff.
Yeah, one of the best books. There are a couple three books I think are really good about this. One is Gabor Mate has written two excellent books about the emotional connection to disease, and he relates in the books some pretty remarkable stories about people who've literally switched their diseases on and off by monitoring emotional state. The other book that I like a lot is Kelly Turner's Radical Remission: The Cancer Patients Who Survived, because a couple of the strategies were physical. They changed their diet and they used some supplements and things like that. But the vast majority of it was they changed the dynamic with their doctors. Their doctors described them as annoying, and we're proud of our people if their doctors get happy with them, because then we know that they're really doing the right things.
All of a
Um,
sudden, they became powerful.
yeah, but
People don't realize that when they walk into that doctor's office, oftentimes it's a power struggle. And if the power isn't in the doctor will just write you off
Well,
and say,
not
listen, if
always.
I'm not
If you
going to be
teach
the
them, you know what? We try to get people not to be at war with their doctors. One of the things that we do is we role play with them, and I have found, and this is interesting, about 75 to 80% of doctors can be brought around if the approach is right. And I would argue that the patient shouldn't have to take responsibility for it, but they do, and so you teach them how to do it. So a typical example of that, and then I'll come back to Kelly's book, is a patient will say, I don't want to take this blood pressure medication. It's making me tired. And the doctor says, we have high blood pressure, so you have to take it. Well, that's pretty unproductive, I think. So let's replay this, right? So a person comes in and says, I have high blood pressure. I'm taking two meds and I'm just wiped out all the time. Okay. All right. So the first thing is, of course, we're going to do diet, hydration, exercise. But the first thing I ask is, do you know how to take your blood pressure at home? And we have a handout that we give them. And I tell them we're going to keep a journal. You're going to do this twice a day, every day, same time when you're in a calm state. You choose the times, but you're going to become a data gatherer on you. All right. You're going to be your best data gatherer. Okay, so let's replay the doctor's appointment. Person goes in and says, hey doc, since the last time I was here, I've been doing some research on how I became hypertensive. And boy, I've taken the bull by the horns, and as you can see, I've lost 22 pounds. And so I brought my blood pressure journal with me, and you can see the readings are going down, and I was wondering if we could start withdrawing. And we get great cooperation. Another thing that I tell my clients is, look, your doctor may not have seen anybody get well, and you might be the first person. All right. So be patient and understand that what you're doing not only benefits you, but may benefit a whole lot of other people that this doctor sees. All right. And we've had that happen where a doctor has been, kind of nervous about diet and inflammatory bowel disease. But once they see the people get better, then they start recommending this to their patients too. So we want to get the friction out as much as we can. And I tell people, listen, if you're as nice as you can be in the whole 9 yards and the person's contentious, then you just get up and walk out and find somebody else. But that does not usually happen. So anyway, but back to Kelly Turner's book, the vast majority of what those cancer patients did was take charge of their health, find their purpose in life, resolve the stuff. Almost all of them were able to say, I think I know why I got this cancer. My life is upside down and sideways. My relationships are skewed. I don't take care of myself. I put everybody else first. And so when they start rearranging those things, the body starts to respond. And it's remarkable how many of those cases are out there. And the reason you don't hear about them is because they fall off the radar screen. There's nobody gathering data on them, but they're out there. And we have a lot of those stories in our own membership.
You just gave my whole program away. That's awesome. I love it. I have, no,
Well,
I have, we have what, no, what's called a signature talk. It says how to make cancer the best thing ever. And that's exactly what, no, what we're
mhm,
trying to demonstrate to people is that when you change your orientation to that diagnosis and you
mhm,
start to understand, no, what's the difference between negative and positive emotion? What, no, what is each one of these things doing in my body? Where am I oriented to? What, no, what's the overwhelming or the dominant emotional state that I have about this? And then all of a sudden it dawns on. I was just on a call yesterday with is a lady who had stage 4 colon cancer, and her numbers are just dropping precipitously because of the she and I both know the work that we're doing. And her cancer doc was like blown away, saying, "Well,
mhm.
he, wow, this chemo is really working good." She just laughed.
Yeah.
She knew better, but no, but
Yeah.
my point is that no, that if you've heard one near death experience, it's not okay. That was kind of weird. When you hear 10,000 of them all saying the same
Mhm.
thing, it becomes data.
Right.
And that radical remission book, the cancer patients that I've got under my belt, that I work with and that my business partner works with, they're all saying the same thing
Mhm.
over and over and over again. That when we take control of our emotional response, these bodies that we live in are nothing more than a piece of meat that is an obligate responder to our emotional state. It's obligated to respond. That means that
Right.
that whatever we change, it will do exactly what it is that we ask it to. We have to understand that there's an unconscious emotional program that's running in everybody, and once we recognize that, understand it, then we can start to manipulate it. And that sounds to me like that's what you're doing with your people.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too is there's a section of Forks Over Knives, the movie, that I point people to. And it's the story of Ruth Heydrich, who had metastasized cancer. I was the science editor for that film. I verified her record. She had mets to the bone in the lung. That's a death sentence. And she says in the film, I just knew if I built a strong body and ate great food, I'd beat this thing, right? And she's exercising and all this. And then later in the film, John McDougall, when they're talking about cancer, he makes a comment and he wasn't trying to be flippant. He says, people get cancer, they get over it. Ruth did. But the whole the thing there was to just take the emotional charge out of it. Like this is just a problem to solve. And people look at that and they go, wow, because when you are diagnosed with cancer, it's shocking, it's a punch in the gut, everybody, and I have people say this all the time. I'm sitting in the room waiting for the doctor to come back, and I could tell by the look on their face, they don't want to deliver the news. It's going to be terrible. And then you start telling your friends and your family, and they're like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And so it's all the wrong thing at that point in time. And I certainly wouldn't expect somebody in a white coat to come dancing into the room and say, "Wow, today's your lucky day. You got stage 3 cancer." But it would be nice if it was delivered by somebody who said, you have stage 3 cancer, but a lot of people survived this. So let's talk about how they did it because you can too. And it would start a process that would be so much less terrifying and that kind of thing. But people find their way to you or to me, and they find out that cancer is not the end of the world. And sometimes, like you said, and I think there's a lot of validity to this, you even look back and say, maybe I got cancer for a reason and it was a good thing because I probably never would have paid attention to whatever it is had it not happened, and I'm better off for it. And that's a very different view than most people hold, and a much better one, I might add.
Pam Popper with Make Americans Free Again. What's the website is makeamericans.free again.com. Is that correct?
Yep, and wellnessforumhealth.com.
Wellnessforumhealth.com. Pam, thank you so much. That no, that's
Thank you
30
for
minutes that
having
just
me.
absolutely disappeared on me, and I love what you have to say. You and I, we're going to talk some more. We'll no, we'll have you back on the program if it's okay with you, but no,
I
we
would
have a
love
lot more
that.
talking to do.
All
So
right.
that's going to do it for no, for another episode of Unlock a Life You Love podcast. My name's Dr. Tim Teel with Pam Popper. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.